The last time we were looking at analyzing this Megyn Kelly interview and ran into some interesting things with respect to the morning timeline. I always thought something was off about that morning timeline. And I was like, I don't know about that. And we got into the looking at the point that um, Patsy was saying that from I got up at 5:30 and I did my makeup, I put on my clothes, I brushed my teeth, went downstairs and kind of packed a little bit more in my bag, and then I got down there and I read a little bit of the ransom note, and I did all of that in 15 minutes. I did all of that in 15 minutes um, because I found the ransom note at 5:45. I find the ransom note at 5:45. John and I have these conversations, and by the time that John and I have these conversations, John tells me to go call the cops. And while I'm calling the cops, somewhere along the line, John runs upstairs and starts getting dressed. Um, so, and it takes John 10 minutes to get dressed when you only have 7 minutes, from 5:45 to 5:55, or I'm sorry, 5:52. Let's say 5:55. And you don't go get dressed or start getting dressed until probably about 5:50. And the officer shows up at 5:55. But somehow the 10 minutes that it took you to get dressed have been condensed into 5 minutes. And John is dressed by the time Officer French shows up. Make it make sense. Before I get started, I do want to say thank you to a very special person. I want to say thank you twice over to Nan. Nan hit me, I think, with five. I'm not sure which one came first, but she hit me with $5 and then doubled back with 15 just to say thank you in a big way and to give me an extra thank you. So thank you so much, Nan. I really appreciate it. Hope you like the next video. I have to reach out and give you a hug. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the next video. So here we go.
Watched us, knew what our patterns were, knew we were going to be out that evening. Left the note on the back stairway, which is the stairway we always used, but would not have been obvious to somebody that just came into the house. We had a front stairway, but we never used that. It was and so why did they leave the ransom note on the back stairway? How did they know that's where we would be coming down in the morning? So,
and the ransom note was found here on the landing pad, like right here on this little landing pad. So, and I guess what got me started was John was saying that I was a little concerned about when they were talking about, first of all, who would have done this. John went into this idea that somebody told him that a Hispanic would have done it, because Hispanic being a foreign faction, a Hispanic would have done it because a Hispanic would have been maybe even like a liberal Hispanic who would have been up in Boulder, Colorado, would have somehow, who was a foreign faction, would have been upset with John and John's company because Lockheed Martin was, maybe not liberal, I guess, is what what he's trying to say. And so that person would have been so upset they would have formed a coalition of individuals, and they would have come against John. They would have colluded to get John's information, and then they would have got the information and broke in and did what they did to JonBenet. So that's what we're talking about. And then we went into this idea that Patsy picking up the note, reading the note, running back upstairs, and got kind of tangled up in where exactly John and Patsy met and what exactly they did after they met. So
Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly.
Stairway, but we never used that.
Mm.
It was just, and so why did they leave the ransom note on the back stairway? How did they know that's where we would be coming down in the morning? So it would have, I mean, there's some elements where somebody could have come into our home. It was not a hard home to break into, and regret to say, and really understood where things were, or they could have been in the house for hours before we got home.
But are we sure that the person, that gratification was a goal of the killer?
I don't know. I think there's another case 7 months later that happened in the neighborhood.
Yes, I know about Amy, and I want to talk to you about Amy. Forgive me for interrupting you, because I want to go down this line, but I want to give us the proper time. And I got to squeeze in a quick commercial break. So let me pause you right there, John Ramsey, and we'll come right back. So much more to discuss. It's an honor to have you here. I know it's not easy to discuss even 26 years later. Even just losing any loved one is tough to discuss, and certainly under these circumstances, even harder. Stand by, John. One of our sponsors today is Principals and Chief Bound in Donors Trust. Do you want a principal partner? A couple things we're going to discuss when John comes back on in a minute, and that is on the ransom note. Do the police believe it was written before or after the murder? That's one of the big questions, because I know the police had said originally not even a serial killer would have the steadiness to write a note like this after a murder. So what do they think? And by the way, a draft of this had been found. The killer had started by on a legal pad that was found in the Ramsey house by saying, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey," and then started over addressing it just to Mr. Ramsey. And then you heard what followed. So there are a lot of questions still about this note and what can be gleaned from it. Before we get to all that, I'm going to play you Patsy Ramsey's describing of the ransom note in a 1997 interview with CNN.
I couldn't read the whole thing. I just gotten up. It was the day after Christmas, and we were going to go visiting. And it was quite early in the morning, and I had gotten dressed and was on my way to the kitchen to make some coffee. And we have a back staircase from the bedroom areas, and I always come down that staircase, and I'm usually the first one down. And the note was lying across the 3 pages across the run of one of the stair treads. And it was kind of dimly lit. It was very early in the morning. And I started to read it, and it was addressed to John. It said, "Mr. Ramsey." And it said, "We have your daughter." And it just wasn't registering. And I may have gotten through another sentence, like, "I can't, we have your daughter." And I don't know if I got any further than that.
And that's when she called 911. The whole thing is just, what was on the note? Were there fingerprints? Was there touch DNA of any kind? John Ramsey's been saying, even if you didn't find fingerprints, there might have been DNA. Even if the person had worn gloves, there might have been DNA on that letter. Has it been tested? If not, why not? Apparently, there are several crime scene items that have not been tested for DNA, even in 2022, when touch DNA is out there. DNA has evolved so much. We're going to discuss all of that with John, plus the neighbor, Amy, a young girl who was by a man in her bedroom in the middle of the night, just months after JonBenet. Wait until you hear what the police did in that case. It's the Christmas and holiday season, and it is time for gift giving, parties with friends and family, and for getting compliments everywhere you go. .com. Treat yourself. Surfacing, in my experience, that's going to restore your youthful ad found in your home of the /MK60. So, John, on the subject of the ransom note, before we leave that, There had been a draft addressed to both of you. Then the final was just you. It was written on a legal pad found in your home. And that's the question, were there any fingerprints? Has it been tested for DNA? Do you know where it came from in the house? And was that area tested for fingerprints, et cetera, at the time?
I don't know. I think my feeling was that the forensics people that came in did a pretty good job in finding a palm print that was unidentified, tracked to anybody, footprints that don't match any shoes of ours in the house, things like that. But whether this stuff was ever tested or not, I don't know. We know there's 5 or 6, maybe 7 items that were originally taken from the crime scene, sent to an outside lab for testing along with others. And 5 or 6 of those items were not tested. They were returned to the police. I don't know why. Either the police didn't want to pay for it because back then it was expensive to do DNA testing. But we know there's 5 or 6 items that had never been tested. And so what else wasn't? I do know that the forensic people the detectives spent a couple hours in the house and then told the DA, well, we're finished. And he said, you can't be finished. Get back in there. So they took a very cursory look at it and then were ordered back in by the DA. A forensics investigator, experienced one, told me they'll spend 3 days on a murder site looking for evidence, not 2 hours. So
God only knows what was compromised. And I know Linda Arndt, the detective, also didn't secure the scene. She let your friends come over and come into the house. She sent you to look around, as we discussed. And then after you found JonBenet, as I understand it, she actually moved JonBenet's body again from one spot to closer by the Christmas tree, which just should never be done when you're dealing with a homicide victim.
Right. No, she just was way in over her head. And
I am flabbergasted. The dancing that Megyn Kelly has to do to allow John to go scot-free is amazing. It's almost as if you want him to be innocent. That's what it's like. It's as if you want him to be innocent. Why do we not address the fact that you contaminated the crime scene first? Why are we not asking that question? We continue to blame Linda, and we say stuff like, oh, what about the ransom note, and what about the body, and I understand that you moved the body. Or Linda Arndt moved it again. How dare she? And she let people run all over the place. And they weren't very thorough in their job, is the point that was being made. When clearly we know that John and Patsy fought over the body of JonBenet. Oh, it usually takes 3 days on a crime scene. It's not going to take 2 hours. Get back in there. That sounds nice. It really does. It really does. However, I don't think they could have really done their job, John, because you and Patsy stopped them from doing their job when they were trying to examine your daughter's body. So you got to take a little bit of responsibility in that.
So
God only knows what was compromised. And I know Linda Arndt, the detective, also didn't secure the scene. She let your friends come over and come into the house. She sent you to look around, as we discussed. And then after you found JonBenet, as I understand it, she actually moved JonBenet's body again from one spot to closer by the Christmas tree, which just should never be done when you're dealing with a homicide victim.
Right. No, she just was way in over her head. And, I was criticized for disturbing the crime scene when I found JonBenet by picking her up and holding her. And what parent wouldn't do that? It just, insane to be to that kind of level of misunderstanding of a parent's love for a
No.
child.
No, it's not possible not to pick up your child and hold her. And at that point, you didn't know whether she was gone. Can we spend a minute on that? Because we talked about how Linda said, okay, search the house. It's 1:00 now in the afternoon. No one's called, no kidnapper. And I understand the note said, well, I'll call tomorrow. So it was unclear whether they meant the 26th.
We are now delving into lies. That's where we are. We're delving into flat out lies. We just gonna start lying is what we gonna do. Linda Arndt allowed your friends to come over? What the heck is going on here? She let me bring my friends over. I couldn't stop her from allowing me to bring the woman don't even know your friends are coming. I don't even know your friends. Why would I allow your friends to come over? You called them. When you called them, how would I'm just showing up to the crime scene at 8:30. Your friends have been here since 6 this morning. What are you talking about, dude?
For disturbing the crime scene when I found JonBenet by picking her up and holding her. And what parent wouldn't do that? It's just insane to be to that kind of level of misunderstanding of a parent's love for a child.
No, it's not possible not to pick up your child and hold her. And at that point, you didn't know whether she was gone.
That was the other lie. John knew JonBenet was dead. He needed Linda Arndt to confirm, but he knew JonBenet was dead. He said he hoped. He hoped. He did know. He knew JonBenet was gone. In the 1998 interview, when talking to Patsy, Tom says, you called the Whites and the Fernies. Do you recall who first? Patsy said, I think I called the Whites first. Tom said, were they closer to you? And Patsy says, well, I had, let me move this. Well, we had just gone there the night before, and I had just dialed them up. They and the Fernies were like our best friends, Tom Haney says, let's take the call to the Whites first. I think that was the sequence. Patsy Ramsey says, I think so. And you called them. Who answered what is said? And Patsy says, I think Priscilla answered. And I mean, I don't know what I said exactly, but somehow I communicated to her that JonBenet was gone and had been kidnapped. And could they come over? I don't know. I was just hysterical. Then I hung up the phone and called the Fernies. And I believe John Fernie answered. Tom says, do you recall exactly what you told him? Patsy said, I said, I'm not sure if I told him. I just can't remember what I told. Oh, please, you got to come. Please, can you bring someone over? Or something, I don't remember. Can John bring someone over? Who would John be bringing over other than Barbara? And understanding that they are close friends, and Tom says, and understanding that they are close friends, but did you think that, give any thought to having all this traffic coming over? Patsy said, no. Tom Haney says, folks coming to the house? Patsy says, no. Tom Haney says, you had gotten through that portion of the note that talked about don't call the police, the FBI. Patsy Ramsey said, We just need to confirm. I just got to confirm with you that you are coherent enough to understand what you're doing. You're being very cerebral about the decisions that you're making. I just want to make sure that you understand that. And Tom says, folks coming to the house. Patsy says, nope, wasn't worried about that. Tom Haney says, you had gotten through that portion of the note that talked about don't call the police or the FBI. And Patsy says, right. Tom Haney says, we are watching you or something like that. Patsy Ramsey says, I know. And how long does it take? So you just gonna do what you want to do. Hung up with the Fernies. Believe John Fernie answered the phone. Asked about all this traffic. I was just hysterical. John Ramsey vaguely remembers Patsy saying, come over, but stated he didn't know she was calling the friends at that moment. Yes. Let's start throwing Patsy under the bus. Absolutely. So in 1998, John Ramsey says it was never heard that. It wasn't never heard that. It wasn't her. It was a fly ball. Mike Cain says fly ball. We all do that. John Ramsey says, yeah. Mike Cain says, all right, look at this. I'm just going through this stuff here. The morning of the 26th, after the police were called, the Whites and the Fernies were called. Was that right away? Were you there when they were called? John Ramsey says, I vaguely remember Patsy saying, come over, but I didn't know she was calling. You didn't have, and Mike Cain says, you didn't have a discussion with her about, and John says, no. Mike Cain says, call. Why did she call those folks? John Ramsey says, I think she just wanted help from friends. Barbara Fernie and her were good buddies. She and Priscilla were good friends. I think she was just reaching out for any help she could gather. Mike Cain says, okay, but you hadn't discussed with her why? John Ramsey says, Mike Cain says, in looking back on it, is there anything, obviously this was a scene where there was a lot of trace evidence and things like that, and more people come in, was more confusing, contamination, that kind of stuff. Do you have any discussions with her about that, about, geez, wish all these folks hadn't been there? John Ramsey says, well, yeah. In retrospect, we wish we had followed. Mike Cain says, have you talked to Ms. Ramsey about that in retrospect? John Ramsey says, not really. Mike Cain says, okay, you mentioned yesterday that when she was on the phone, 911 call, that she was having a hard time communicating the seriousness of it or something like that. I can't remember. John Ramsey says, I just remember her saying that, I didn't hear the other side of the conversation. So I remember. So I am starting to pick up. They're saying, I just remember. And Burke, a lot of times, would say in his interview with Dr. Phil, I just remember. I just remember. And so John, I'm seeing where he picks it up from. He's picking it up from John, which is fine. That's no problem. But here in 1998, there seems to be an admission of sort of guilt in, like, we probably shouldn't have called everybody over, or we probably should have listened to the note before Mike Cain cuts them off. Probably should have listened to the note a little bit more. John is saying, I heard Patsy kind of calling people to come over, but I vaguely remember her saying, come over. You know what's weird about that, though? Like we talked about last video, how would you hear Patsy saying, come over, if you're in your underwear needing to go get dressed? Is Patsy talking so loud that you can hear from the bottom of the first floor all the way to the top? Is that the case? So when Burke says, I think I would hear something if something was going on, and you say, nah, I wouldn't hear anything. How would you not hear anything if you can hear Patsy downstairs on the phone calling people. Because, oh, well, Patsy's screaming. If Patsy's screaming and everybody in the house can hear Patsy screaming, then wouldn't you be able to hear a JonBenet scream? Because somebody screamed. Wouldn't you be able to hear JonBenet scream throughout the night? Because if you're upstairs and you can hear Patsy all the way downstairs, it kind of sounds like, all right, whatever. Or you were already dressed and you didn't need to go back upstairs and get dressed. Or you were already dressed. You were already in your clothes. You and Patsy. Vaguely remember, Mike Kane said, you never heard it was 98 June. You never heard it was Patsy that threw the ball. No. Okay. I don't know what that's talking about. But anyways, so according to the search warrant documentation, Rick French tells Detective Arndt that the Whites and the Fernies had been phoned by either John or Patsy shortly after the note was found, indicating the initial information received by police was that the call came from either of them. According to the search warrants. Yeah. This is probably Rick French's. Ramsey, father of JonBenet, Patricia Ramsey, mother of JonBenet, and Burke, 10 to 11-year-old brother of JonBenet. When Detective Arndt arrived at the Ramsey residence, persons present included John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, Priscilla and Fleet White, friends of the family, Barbara and John Fernie, friends of the family, the pastor from St. John's Episcopalian Church, 1400 block, BPD officer Rick French and Barry Weiss. Officer French personally told Detective Arndt Whites and Fernies had been phoned by either John or Patsy shortly after the note was found. Immediately come over to the Ramseys residence. Pastor also responded to the Ramsey residence shortly after the note was found. So Linda Arndt shows up. She shows up she shows up to the house and they're already there. Linda Arndt didn't allow anything. They were already there. They brought in, not only did your other friends come in, this was not a homicide yet. This was not a homicide investigation. That's when all of your friends came over. Anybody else who came over was in the afternoon, and that was, as far as I know of, Mike Bynum, who was acting as your attorney, and Dr. Buff, who was acting as, your, doctor, your physician, who needed to get you your medication. But other than that, I don't think anybody came over. But you had people like Susan Stein come through, I think, during the day, and you had victims advocates in there kind of to help out and talk to you and stuff like that. So it's not that Linda Arndt allowed things to happen. You guys, as you've been doing this entire time, sort of bogarted her and ran her over, and you call people. This is what you're doing this entire time. You're trying to blame Linda Arndt for something, but then, every move that you say Linda Arndt made, you made first. You brought the body up. And you, man, I saw that. Man, I didn't want to touch that. But John was over there hugging the body. All right. And when we look at the police reports, both John and Patsy having physical contact with JonBenet after she was found. Both of you guys. John Ramsey came into the living room area approximately 1 to 2 minutes after I had sent him back to the den. As John entered the room, he asked me if he could cover up JonBenet. I sent him to the den Linda was there by herself. I sent this man away. Get out of my face. But John won't have it. He came into the living room area approximately 1 to 2 minutes after I sent him back to the den. As so you're probably here. And if I move the body over here and I told you get out of my way, go over here, I'm dealing with this. You come back and stand over me. This is a woman. Linda Arndt is by herself with a man hovering over her while she's not paying attention. She has her head down and she's trying to go through her checklist or whatever she needs to do. And John is hovering over her. That makes somebody feel unsafe because I don't know what the heck is going on. You said this child was kidnapped. I don't know what kind of freaking funny business y'all got going on in here. Get away from me. Stop standing over me, dude. I do not trust you. I don't know you. Oh, Linda Arndt, this and that. Bro, I don't know you. Get away from me. Stop standing over me. Dude, I'm getting trauma just like from thinking about me with my head down trying to do whatever. You said this girl wasn't in this house. You said she was gone. And for you to come waltzing up the stairs with this girl in your hands, I'm like, what the heck? Impossible. And you lay her on the ground like, oh, I don't know what y'all got. And so Linda basically stepped back and said, I don't know what y'all got going on, but I don't like it. Go over here, please, and stand out of the way. Go in this room and stand out of the way. I'm in here doing my thing. Okay, so I messed up. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have taken her from here and moved her to here. I made a mistake. Let me clean up my mistake. While I'm doing this, you come standing over me. One to 2 minutes after I sent him back to the den, as John entered the room, he asked me if he could cover up JonBenet. John grabbed a throw blanket that was lying on a chair located immediately inside the living room. John placed this blanket over JonBenet's body before I had a chance to speak. Tell me again, what did Linda allow to happen? I'm sorry, I'm confused. Because what I see is John Ramsey taking the bull by the horns. You know, can I cover up? Boom. Man. John placed the blanket over JonBenet's body before I had a chance to speak. I adjusted the blanket on JonBenet's body so that her clothing was covered from her neck down. I also covered the neck area of JonBenet. I had covered the wound on JonBenet's neck with her long sleeve shirt before John Ramsey arrived in the living room. I told John Ramsey that he could say goodbye to his daughter, but he couldn't move her body, touch her hands, or lower the blanket. John knelt on the floor next to JonBenet. John repeatedly referred to JonBenet as my little angel. John stroked JonBenet's hair with one of his hands. John Ramsey laid down next to JonBenet, placed an arm around her body, and made sounds as though he was crying. I did not notice any tears. John Ramsey then rolled away from JonBenet's body and went into kneeling position. When John rolled away from JonBenet's body, he looked around towards the hallway. Okay. John Ramsey then knelt by JonBenet's body, hugged her, and called her his little angel. After approximately 5 to 10 seconds, John stopped hugging JonBenet and again looked toward the hallway. John remained kneeling near JonBenet when I looked into the hallway towards the den. I was able to watch JonBenet, John Ramsey, and people coming from the den toward the living room. I saw Patsy Ramsey. It seemed as though Patsy was unable to walk without the assistance of somebody holding her up. So, and Linda tells in her report, I believe, the story that she kept paging and calling people like, y'all got to get back over here. Y'all have to get back over here to help me, please. And, you know, she couldn't get people and she couldn't get them back over because they were I don't think they were ignoring her. They were in a meeting about this. They had went over, grabbed some stuff, grabbed the ransom note and everything, and then debriefed. And they were trying to debrief in a meeting about what they wanted to do moving forward. Linda was there by herself, and this is at 1:00. So Linda was there by herself trying to hold down the scene. And so obviously he knelt by her, blah, blah, blah. Source describes Patsy as also doing the same thing. Patsy Ramsey came into the living room after John and others. Same thing. When Patsy saw JonBenet's body, she immediately went to her and laid on top of her. Living room area, when Patsy saw JonBenet, she immediately went to her and laid on top of her. As they faced JonBenet from the hallway, John Ramsey was to the right of her body. These are markouts. Somebody was toward JonBenet's head. Patsy Ramsey was next to them, next to Patsy near JonBenet's feet, so on and so forth. When so-and-so entered the living room, she was shaking, her eyes wide, blah, blah, blah. Told me not to leave. I asked the minister to pray for JonBenet. This is so weird. Yeah. So they were kind of doing the same thing, being really weird, man. Because Detective Whitson, I think on the cold case, he says, when I came in and I came back, Patsy was holding JonBenet and just rocking back and forth. Now, Detective Whitson got back late. Mind you, Linda Arndt told John and Patsy, don't touch her body, don't move her. Do you think they listened? And you're trying to blame Linda Arndt for a contamination of a crime scene that the lady told you not to touch, but I don't really have the full authority of the police because I'm here by myself. So I'm not comfortable being hostile with you right now because I don't really know you people. And y'all might try to do something to me. So
Parents' love for a child.
No, it's not possible not to pick up your child and hold her. And at that point, you didn't know whether she was gone. Can we spend a minute on that? Because we talked about how Linda said, okay, search the house. It's 1:00 now in the afternoon. No one's called, no kidnapper. And I understand the note said, well, I'll call tomorrow. So it was unclear whether they meant the 26th or the 27th.
Right.
But you're sitting there and you're waiting and nothing's happening. And now it's 1:00 in the afternoon. She says, go look around the house. And the people who want to say, oh, look at John. One of the things they say is, oh, he went right to the room. He went to the basement and he went right to, there's a storage room off the basement where she was found. Is that true? Like, what did you do after Linda said, go search the house?
Well, a friend of mine that was there to help console us, she said for both of us to go search the house. And so we went to the basement, which to me was a logical place to start. Third floor, you couldn't get into the third floor from outside. So we went to the basement and when.
Yeah, you say that, but then you mention when you're talking to the cops in interviews, like we reviewed, you mention windows being open on the third floor. Then why did you say that? Why did you waste my time listening to you talk about open windows on the third floor? If the basement is a logical place to start, how is the basement a logical place to start for somebody who knows your pattern, knows who you are, knows how to get into your house, and knows that you didn't lock or check all of the doors or what have you, and knows that you didn't set the alarm? No, it's not.
Into what we call the train room, where the kids had a train set up. And there was an open window and a suitcase propped up under the window as if it were to be a step. And I told my friend, I said, that suitcase should not be there. That's way out of place. We wouldn't have put it there. And so then I went into the only other room in that basement was this, we called it a wine cellar, but it was an old coal cellar, dark. One door going into it, no entrances from the outside. And I opened the door and of course, immediately found JonBenet. And, we heard Linda Arndt say on the media or on an interview that, well, I told him to go from top to bottom and he started out in the bottom. Why'd he do that? This just was logical to me, but yeah, then I went into the The only other room in that basement was this, we called it a wine cellar, but it was an old coal cellar, dark, one door going into it, no entrances from the outside. And I opened the door and, of course, immediately found JonBenet. And, I don't, we heard Linda Arndt say,
I think John is getting turned around in his story. Why would you check a room that has no entrances from the outside? Why would you check there? First of all. Second of all, if you go right here and you go boom, John says, oh, that's the only other room in the basement. There's another storage room. There's another laundry room. There's a bathroom. There's a boiler room with a partition where you can hide somebody back here. There is a crawl space. There is a closet. There is another closet. So now I know why he went directly here, because he's saying, oh, there's another room, but bro, do you think we're blind? We know, bro, we have the same schematics of your house that you do. I can see that there are more rooms in this basement than just this wine cellar. Why would you tell me that? Bro, man, see, there's no way. There's no way that John he might be sleepwalking through this interview. Because there's no way you would say that. It's like, dude, 1, 2, possibly 3, 4. Let's just say 1, 2, 3 other rooms aside from this room. We've already disproved that it took you 5 minutes to come down here, take a look, get down on the ground, pick up glass, look for glass, and then jump over here. And we already disproved that it don't take you no 5 minutes. All right.
On the media or on an interview that, well, I told him to go from top to bottom and he started out in the bottom. Why'd he do that? This just was logical to me, but yeah, it.
Do you remember that moment? I mean, do you remember, did it switch from concern to panic? Do you remember emotionally what that
it was
moment?
a switch from panic and it was a relief. Thank God I found my child. Oh. And that was the immediate feeling that I'd found her. She's safe. And but it fairly quickly concluded that she wasn't all right. Mm. And so I just picked her up and carried her screaming. Actually, I was screaming. To upstairs to take her to help. I mean, I don't know, it's just an instinctive reaction, I guess. But and we laid her down on the floor of the living room in front of the Christmas tree, and
he's I want to say it seems like he seems a little discombobulated, to be honest with you. His sort of speaking pattern has slowed. It almost seems as if he's thinking through something, and I'm not saying that he's thinking through his answers. I don't think it's that. I think he's actually recalling and recounting the situation. Like, when you talk about something, but you're distracted by something else. Like, you're talking about one thing, but you're thinking about another thing. That's what it looks like he's doing. Like, I've separated my answer from what's going on in my mind. So if you ask me, what was JonBenet's birthday? I mean, her birthday was December. Her birthday was I think her birthday was like December or something like that. It was, well, I know Burke's birthday. His birthday was something along the lines of, I think, January. And so they did, when we were going to have a Christmas party. That's what he's doing. He's getting around to answer your question, but he's like thinking about something else. And I almost would say that there's like a little grief seeping in right there. Grief about the truth of the situation.
Linda Arndt had looked for a pulse and looked up at me and said, "No, she's gone." And I guess it was that moment when she saw in my eyes that I was the killer. So, and then we were ushered out of the house pretty quickly, and we never went back in that home. That was the last time we were in that home. And,
John, can I ask you, because I know that one of the things that JonBenet was wearing was her cross necklace. And according to what I read, and we heard Patsy praying to Jesus, to help her. And I wondered if you were a family of faith and if, what this did to that, right? If you were able to carry that on.
Well, that's a good question. And I really had to face that issue when my oldest daughter was killed in a car accident about 4 years before. And the first words that came out of my mouth was, "There is no God. There is no God. How could a loving God let this happen to a beautiful young child?" She was 21. But it really forced me to think about my faith. And I had a friend came alongside of me and said, "I'm going to help you study the Bible." And he was a real mentor to me in that struggle to understand why this would happen. I was a Christian. I had joined the club. If you're in the club, you shouldn't be subject to harm or tragedy. And of course, that's not at all what the Bible says. You're going to get persecuted. But I struggled with that for 3 or 4 years. Is there an afterlife? Will I see Beth, my oldest daughter, again? And it was tough for 3 or 4 years. But I'd kind of wrestled that down to, there is more to life than just what we see here. And so when we lost JonBenet, I didn't have to go through that struggle. I'd already been through, why did God let this happen? So my faith was not challenged when JonBenet was killed, only because I'd gone through that challenge when I lost my oldest daughter.
Mm-hmm. Then you go through the added pain of being not outright accused by the authorities, but pretty close. I mean, the DA earlier, before Mary Lacy, the DA said they didn't do it. The DNA rules them out. 4 months after JonBenet died, the DA, Alex Hunter, said, Patsy and John are the focus. They're the focus. Opened up a grand jury proceeding, and the grand jury came back and said, don't see anything that you're going to be able to pursue as beyond a reasonable doubt. And the DA ultimately had to admit that. Mm. But I mean, you're going through.
Don't try to swing the story. Don't try to swing the story. They went with what they were presented with. Don't try to be like, because you were about to lie is what you were about to do. You were about to see, you keep on trying to spin the narrative and be like, oh, they looked and they didn't find anything. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. They gave 2 charges. That's what they found. But then you try to manipulate it and say, oh, they looked and said, well, it's not going to be anything that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah, because when you have somebody that's not presenting the full scope of the evidence, what do you think's going to happen, Megyn? I am just, please, I'm begging you. You guys got to think through this. There's no need. Just don't even mention the grand jury. There's no need for you to mention the grand jury at all. If you're just going to try to spin it and say, oh, they said we have said, well, they said you're not going to be able to find anything that you. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? There's no reason.
Being accused. And then on top of all that, John, you've got, right, which basically tried to make JonBenet and Patsy into this bizarre daughter-mother team. You know, she was exploited. The beauty pageant videos on endless loop. So talk about that for a bit and what that was like for you.
Well, the media, of course, jumped on it, but they were being fed information that was misleading, wrong. And we were told by Mary Lacey several years after she got into her position as the new DA, she said that was the police strategy that was defined to them by someone, whether it was the FBI or some wacko psychologist, put intense pressure on the family. We know it's one of the two. They're in the house, either the father killed her or the mother did. One of them will confess eventually if we put enough pressure on them. Strategy to solve the case. And so they released a lot of information that was misleading, wrong. And we were told by Mary Lacey several years after she got into her position as the new DA, she said that was the police strategy that was defined to them by someone, whether it was the FBI or some wacko psychologist.
Oh, I thought, how is it possible for them to have received a strategy from the FBI when they wouldn't allow the FBI to help them? You see what you do when you say silly things and you continue to push a narrative that they didn't want any help, but yet the DA comes, the DA that you trust, the DA that exonerated you, admits that they received help from the FBI, and you come on this platform and say again that they did not accept help from the FBI, but the FBI gave them some wacko or silly strategy that you didn't agree with. Newsflash, like we continue to say, John, it doesn't matter if it was the BPD or the FBI. They were both coming after you the same way.
Just put intense pressure on the family. We know it's one of the two. They're in the house, either the father killed her or the mother did. One of them will confess eventually if we put enough pressure on them. And Mary Lacey, the DA, said that was their strategy to solve the case. And so they released a lot of information, misleading information, incorrect information to the media. And of course, the media ran with it. We were quickly convicted in the court of public opinion. We didn't know that's exactly what was happening, but
in spite of what you did in the media, right? In spite of like your own campaign in the media, people didn't want to hear your story. The police, with your high-powered attorneys and your PR firm that the attorneys hired, through all of that, the lowdown Boulder Police Department, the incompetent Boulder Police Department, was still able to be more effective in getting the word out and spinning the narrative against you than your $1 million PR firm and legal team.
It was confirmed by the DA. And the problem for the police was they did a great job of convicting us in the court of public opinion with the assistance of the media, but they couldn't charge us. It had been a bloodbath for them in the court because the evidence was quite contradictory to that. As they got into looking at the evidence, because they'd made their conclusion, I believe on the day or the day after of JonBenét's murder, and then went about, let's find the evidence to prove it. Well, the evidence they were finding was contradictory to that conclusion. And that became a problem for them because, the media and the public was, screaming, hey, you arrest them, charge them. And they couldn't.
Well, and meanwhile, in the interviews, you held firm. I mean, Patsy, they got all up in her grill. And when I watch her, because I've spent a lot of time with this guy's name is Phil Houston. He invented the CIA's deception detection technique that they still use today. He was there 25 years. There's all sorts of ways you can tell somebody's lying. And they're pretty foolproof if you know how to apply them. And one of the things is just sort of no BS. You don't do convincing behavior. You're just hardcore. No, stop. Like, I mean, I'm sure if I showed him the Patsy Ramsey tapes with the cops, he'd be like, why did they waste so much time with her? Right? Like, it was pretty obvious. And I'll just show some to the audience, a clip. This is from 1998, 2 years later. Police interview of Patsy. They're telling her falsely that they have trace evidence linking her or you to the murder. I would be suggesting if I.
So you didn't actually, Megyn. We have got to do better than this. We really do. You didn't actually take the tapes to this guy? Why are you referencing him? If you didn't take the tapes, you don't know what he would say. Oh, I'm pretty sure. No, you don't. You're not sure at all. You don't know what he would do. Are you kidding me? You have got to be kidding me with this.
Had that, how would you react? Here it is, top 5.
If I told you right now that we have trace evidence that appears to link you to the death of JonBenet, what would you tell me?
That's totally impossible.
Totally impossible.
How is it
Do a
impossible?
retest.
I did not kill my child. I didn't have a thing to do with it.
Yeah, and I'm not talking, somebody's guess or some rumor or some story.
I don't care what you're talking about.
I'm talking about scientific evidence.
I don't give a flying flip how scientific it is. Go back to the damn drawing board. I didn't do it. John Ramsey didn't do it, and we didn't have a clue of anybody who did do it. My life has been hell from that day forward. And I want nothing more than to find out who was responsible for this. Okay? I mean, I want to work with you, not against you. Okay? This child was the most precious thing in my life. And I can't stand the thought, thinking that somebody's out here walking on the street. God knows they might do it again to some other child. Quit screwing around asking me about things that are ridiculous and let's find the person that did this.
Wow. The frustration, it's palpable because it's like, as
Is it? Is it? Yeah. I guess it would be palpable. I guess it would be palpable. I guess it would be. Cannot be excluded. Extremely, just because she's so frustrated, she must be telling the truth. Cannot be excluded. Oh, because the evidence, I don't care how scientific it is. Go back to, okay. I got it. So if I don't care how scientific the evidence is, you cannot be exonerated. Mary Lacey exonerated you. Oh, Mary, I don't care. I don't care how scientific the evidence is, Mary. Go back to the drawing board. Cannot be excluded. Not included or excluded. Cannot be excluded. Blood. Blood. Blood was indicated. Blood on the nightgown. Barbie nightgown. CBI number 17. Number 17. CBI laboratory report. Either we gonna investigate it right, or we not gonna investigate it at all.
She points out he could be hurting other children.
All right. Yes, and probably did. There's a high probability, I'm told, that creature doesn't just stop with one. Maybe has done it before.
This is right around the time where Lou Smit walked out. The detective, the retired detective, who they brought in because they couldn't solve the case. And he solved every single case he ever worked on except for this one. They brought him in, take fresh eyes. What do you think? And Lou took his fresh eyes looked at everything and said, they didn't do it. This is not, Patsy and Ramsey that's the wrong tree to bark up.
Yep.
And they didn't listen to him to the point where he quit. He called this a travesty and said they were trying to railroad you. It's crazy, John, that wasn't the end of the story. It would take another 10 years for Mary Lacey to get that DNA test and say, just stop with the obsessive focus on the Ramseys.
I'm going to stop it right there. I'm going to help you to get your blood pressure down. I'm going to stop it right there because, Megyn, please, I am begging you. You have got to be kidding me with what you're talking about. Maybe you didn't know, but Boulder was a pretty safe town. But every single case that came across their desk, they didn't have many cold cases. Honey, they didn't. So, yes, Lou had about 200 some odd cases under his belt, way more than Boulder. But like I've said before, that's not Boulder's fault. I saw what's on my desk. Period. Lou, as we always say, garbage in, garbage out. If Lou is dealing with garbage input in the investigation, then he's going to have a garbage output. If Lou goes with, yes, in theory, if we go with the scenario that Lou investigated, sure, we would probably come to the same conclusion. But if I knock out some of that nonsense that you're telling me, because I know that's highly improbable and I find that your timelines don't match, no, it doesn't make sense. And the autopsy shows that. The forensics show that. So while you're going to sit up here on your podcast and say that the forensics say something that they don't, and then try to create an argument from that, we're going to be over here reading what the autopsy said for real and then go from there. That's everything for now. Take care of yourself. Of course, like, share, and subscribe. And thanks, Nan, once again for the support. And each and every one of you. Appreciate you. And until next time, take it easy.